I'm going to make him a helper. And they say, what does that mean? Ibn Ezra says, it's like the reasoning. The idea is that two are better than one. But that's all we say so far, right? He doesn't explain it has anything to do with wives. He doesn't explain who it has to do with. But the idea here on this commentary is that in general, it's better to have more than one person than it is to have one person. Now, obviously, I'm sure you can think of there's an expression called the klupskasha. There's a million different examples that you can think of where actually it's probably occasionally good to have only one person. This is just the source sheet, just so you have it. But for our purposes here, what we're interested in is just sort of jumping off the idea that when God says it's not good for Adam to be alone.
Oh yeah, right.
That the idea is that it's good to always have companions. So with that, I'm going to jump to the Babylonian Talmud.
Excuse me, could I ask everyone to mute yourselves again? Because there's some background noise. Thanks.
Yeah. All right, good. Oh, I'm sorry. So hold on. Okay. I'm trying to move my Zoom box a little bit over because it gets a little bit unwieldy. Okay, so here's where it goes. Brachot 5b. So this is Babylonian Talmud, Brachot 5b. Rabbi Chia bar Abba fell ill. Rabbi Yochanan came in to visit him. So it happens to be that Rabbi Chia is actually a student of Rabbi Yochanan. I'm just going to close these for a second. And he said, is your suffering
Iscah, you have to unmute
yourself.
Okay, you can hear me now? Yes?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so I'm not sure where you lost me, but okay. So just to go back to the beginning, Rabbi Chia bar Abba fell ill. Yochanan went in to visit him. That's his teacher. He went in to visit him and he said to him, is your suffering dear to you? This is an expression that the rabbis have a tendency to use, that the idea of their theology, doesn't mean that should be all of our theology, but the theology that was prevalent in the time of the rabbis was the idea that suffering is God's way of saying, I love you and you're going to be sort of forged in fire. There's lots of problems with that theology, which I welcome, I guess, in the question section. But right now, that's the sort of premise that we're working with. Rabbi Chia says to Yochanan in response, no, I welcome neither the suffering nor its reward. And Rabbi Yochanan says to him, okay, give me your hand. So in other words, he starts to ask him, like, are you happy with the suffering? Do you want it? Do you want to keep it? And Rabbi Chia says, no, I don't want the suffering nor its reward. We don't exactly know what is meant by the reward, although I speculate he means the reward in the world to come, right? After his life is over. Rabbi Yochanan says, give me your hand. Rabbi Chia bar Abba does. And Rabbi Yochanan stood him up and restored him to health. So that's the power of Rabbi Yochanan. Now I could end right here, right? And just say, well, happily ever after. It's nice to know that rabbis have such power. But in reality, I think what's more interesting is to look, before I even go any farther in this text, is to look at the idea that this person comes to visit his student and he's able to restore him to health. So we already have a person alone who is sick, and then a person who visits him and then makes him better. Maybe he has special powers, maybe the actual power is in the visit itself. Okay, so then the text goes on. Rabbi Yochanan fell ill. Rabbi Hanina went in to visit him and said to him, is your suffering dear to him? So we have the same story but reversed, right? This time the teacher falls ill and Rabbi Hanina comes in, his student comes in to, actually it's a different two students, I'm sorry. Rabbi Hanina comes in to visit him and says, is your suffering dear to you? Rabbi Yochanan says to him, I welcome neither the suffering nor its reward. It's the same pattern, but this time, instead of Yochanan being the healer, he's the one who is sick. Rabbi Hanina says to him, give me your hand. He gives him his hand, and Rabbi Hanina stood him up and restored him to health. So, of course, this being the Talmud says, why did Rabbi Yochanan wait for Rabbi Hanina to restore him to health? In other words, if he was able to heal his student, how much the more so should we assume that Rabbi Yochanan should be able to heal his own self, right? And the Gemara answers, a prisoner cannot generally free himself from prison. So the idea that we're getting here in this text in Brachot 5b is that um, companionship in this way is actually so helpful, it can actually heal, right? Without him, Yochanan in theory should have the power, because God knows that he seems to have the ear of God, or the power of healing. He was able to heal Rabbi Chia, but he cannot do that for himself, because a person alone does not have that power. This text tells me, right, that he actually requires the companionship, in this instance of Rabbi Hanina, to come and heal him, even though in theory he should by himself have that power. By yourself, you don't actually, it doesn't come to fruition. Okay, so I know that Mona spoke about Choni Agal last week, and I know that many of you know the story of Choni Agal. This is Choni, the circle drawer. That's drawer, or in this instance, drawer. He draws a circle, if you guys remember, and he's called upon whenever the world is in a drought, basically. And he's a very interesting character. I've actually spent whole courses really talking about him, just because he's really interesting. And also, one of the things that is interesting about him from my perspective is who likes him and who doesn't, which I won't spend a lot of time on now. But if you read the story a little bit earlier than where I picked up in the Babylonian Talmud, Ta'anit, we have the idea that he's got a lot of chutzpah. Is to say, he says to God, I'm going to draw a circle, and I'm going to stand here until you give us rain. And you can see that God's response is actually not so positive. First, God gives drip drops, etc. Then eventually gives rain after a while. And then he gives too much rain because he seems to be annoyed with Choni. In addition, some other rabbis found him very irritating. But what I do know is that it appears that Choni Amelgel seems to be a folk figure, a very popular folk figure, which I think is actually relevant to this part of the text. Now, some of you are familiar with the story of Rip Van Winkle, right? The idea that somebody, this man sort of falls asleep and ends up seeing future generations. I think Rip Van Winkle is a longer period of time, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not remembering correctly. But right here, we have this sort of famous story that is used quite a bit in Tu B'Shvat, Seders, and other kind of ecological pieces. But I want to read it in a slightly different way. So here's what we got. One day, he was walking, this is Choni, was walking along the road when he saw a certain man planting a carob tree. Choni says to him, how many years is it going to take for this tree to bear fruit? The man said to him, oh, it's not going to produce fruit for 70 years. And Choni says, like, really? Pshita l'cha, is it obvious to you that you are going to live for 70 years, that you're going to actually get to enjoy this tree? And the man said, that man, meaning this man, found himself in a world full of carob trees. Just as my ancestors planted for me, I am also planting for my descendants. So the reason why I think that's actually very interesting is it seems to be a kind of foreshadowing for the next section, where he's already sort of like starting to think about the future and what happens in 70 years. So the story continues. Choni sat and ate bread. Sleep overcame him and he slept. There was a cliff that formed around him and he disappeared from sight, and he slept for 70 years. When he awoke, he saw a certain man gathering carobs from that very same tree. Choni said to him, hey, are you the one who planted this tree? And the man said, no, I am his son's son, meaning his grandson. Choni said to him, I can learn from this that I have slept for 70 years. Oy. And indeed, he saw that his donkey had sired several herds during those many years. I'm not exactly sure how many donkeys were alive in that scenario, but not important right now. Okay, so here's what happens. And now the question rises for us, so what do you do now? You're 70 years into the future. You, by rights, are unlikely to have been alive in this time period. Even he thought that when the man had asked him, or when he had asked the man. And so that's kind of weird. So he goes home because he doesn't know where else to go. And he says, hey, he figures maybe my son's still alive. Is the son of Choni Me'agel alive? And they said, no, his son is no longer with us, but his grandson, so Choni's grandson is alive. And he said, I'm Choni Me'agel. And they were like, no, you're not. They didn't believe him. So he went to the study hall, because where else are you going to find companionship in the world of the study hall? He heard the sages say about one particular scholar his halachot are as enlightening and as clear as in the years of Choni HaMe'agel, because back in the days of Choni HaMe'agel, he used to come into the study hall and he would resolve for the sages any difficulty that they had. Choni said to them, I'm he, like I'm Choni. But they did not believe him and they did not pay him proper respect. So Choni became very upset. He prayed for mercy and he died. This explains, Rava says, this explains the folk saying that people say, either fellowship or death. This is a very famous line, right? O charuta o mituta. So far what we have is this idea that, I'm just gonna stop the share for a second just so I can see people's faces, I think. That the notion is that Choni is at first, when he's 70 years younger, right? He's not really thinking about the future. He's not really thinking about anything except for really himself. And it's actually this stranger, this sort of magical tree planter, who ends up trying to teach him basically that you actually kind of have to care about people outside your own circle. Yes, that was not an accident, right? And that the idea is, he sort of learns a lesson, and that's usually where we stop the Tu B'Shvat Seder, but the reality is the second part is more interesting. He sleeps for 70 years, and then he realizes he has nothing. He has no one. So he seeks, he desperately craves companionship, and the only place he figures out to go once he realizes that his wife is probably gone, his son is gone, and his grandson, he probably didn't know, is I don't know where. They couldn't find him. He thought, well, maybe he's at the study hall, so he goes. He tries to seek out the companionship that he's missing, and he can't find it because ultimately they don't believe him. They don't think that he's actually Choni, and so he's lost all the status and the companionship and the fellowship that he used to have, that he had earned for however many years, not just being a circle drawer, but also being a scholar, that he craves it and he lost it, so he prays for mercy. Whenever it says you pray for mercy, usually you would think you pray for mercy and it's something positive, but the mercy that he requested was more like euthanasia, like he requests his own death, and that's what he gets, and he's given death as his as his prayer was intending. So that's kind of an interesting little story in terms of Choni HaMe'agel. Okay, so am I correct that we are taking questions after? Yeah. Okay. I'm going to go back to this text. Okay, so now we're going to do another famous story, which I think many of you have actually had access to. These are very popular stories. There's a series of them, but we're going to do the most common, the most popular one about Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. So this text you can find in the Babylonian Talmud, Bava Metzia, 84a, where it tells us that one day Rabbi Yochanan was bathing in the Jordan River, and Reish Lakish. Now, Reish Lakish is an interesting guy. He was born, we believe, born Jewish, but actually sort of got taken in and ended up joining a band of robbers. And he was, hanging out. He sees Rabbi Yochanan bathing in the Jordan River, and he jumps in the Jordan, pursuing him. Now, with that, I need to take a little side note just to explain that Rabbi Yochanan was beautiful. If ever you want to set a very, very fun and kind of funny texts, a lot of them are Rabbi Yochanan based. No, pardon me. Rabbi Yochanan is considered so beautiful that literally women who were pregnant who walked by him on their way to the, actually, I'm sorry, I misspoke. Women who were on their way to the mikvah, not yet pregnant, who were going to become clean so that they could have relations with their husbands in order to get pregnant, that women who saw him would have babies that were equally beautiful to him. That's how beautiful he was. There's other texts that imply that he's so beautiful that he literally glowed. He literally lit up a room physically, not spiritually, but physically lit up a room. Rabbi Yochanan is bathing in the Jordan River. Reish Lakish sees him and he sees that he's so beautiful and he jumps in. The implication most likely there is that he jumps in thinking that he is a woman. I'm sure there are many other ways to read this. I'm going to read it in a more traditional way. And Rabbi Yochanan says to Reish Lakish, hi, your strength is fit for Torah. Like, why are you wasting all your strength on being a robber? You should be learning Torah with all that vigor. Reish Lakish says to him, your beauty is best for women. There's two ways to read that. I think the most likely way is saying, you're so pretty, you should be a girl. Other people might read that as your beauty should be meant to pick up girls. I think that's actually very unlikely. I believe that it's your beauty is best for being a woman. Rabbi Yochanan says to him, if you return to the pursuit of Torah, I will give you my sister in marriage, who, by the way, is more beautiful than I am. So Reish Lakish says, all right, sounds good, good deal. Accepts upon himself to study Torah. They had many, many years of study and fellowship. You can find throughout the Talmud a bunch of quotes about various halachot, Jewish laws, where each of them are having disagreements with each other. That's a positive thing in the rabbinic community, as we're going to see, that you want to have a bar plukta, a person who is your study buddy, the person that you, yes, occasionally butt heads with, but that you also can go to, like you want to sharpen your own thinking in order by contrasting it to your partner. So Hillel and Shammai, come to mind for a lot of people. Abai, Rav and Abai, Rabbi and Abai. So after years of study and fellowship, the two rabbis came to a disagreement over when a weapon, a particular type of weapon, was considered to be completed. And they cared about this because they wanted to know whether it would be, like, at what point it would become impure. Rabbi Yochanan, so Reish Lakish corrects Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, well, a bandit knows about banditry in kind of a snarky, obnoxious way. This very much upset Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish says, what benefit did you do? What good did you do me by bringing me close to Torah? When I was among the bandits, they called me leader of the bandits. Here too, they call me leader of the bandits. So what's the difference? Over there, they called me leader of the bandits and it was a positive thing because I was their leader. Here, you're calling me leader of the bandits and you're being obnoxious. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, what do you mean? I got you benefit. I provided benefit to you because I brought you close to God. You're now under the wings of the Shekhinah, the wings of the divine presence. Reish Lakish was so upset by this that ultimately he got sick and he died. In other words, losing what he perceived as the respect of Rabbi Yochanan, his study partner, his chavruta, was enough to make him so upset that he died. Rabbi Yochanan was very upset when he lost Reish Lakish. And the rabbis said, who is going to calm Rabbi Yochanan's mind to comfort him over his loss? They said, oh, let's go get this other guy, Elazar ben Padat, as he's pretty smart. He's clever, and he'll be able to serve as a substitute for Reish Lakish. I did not preserve this entire text for you, but the idea is that it did not work out at all. Rabbi Elazar ben Padat, as smart as I'm sure he really was, he was not a substitute. You cannot really replace chavruta when you have that special relationship. This companionship that Rabbi Yochanan lost, was such a great loss for him that it was not enough for him. And then he went around ripping his clothing and weeping and crying out, where are you, Ben Lakish? Where are you, son of Lakish? Where are you? Rabbi Yochanan screamed until his mind was taken for him, which is a euphemistic way of saying that he went insane. The rabbis prayed and they requested for God to have mercy on him, to take his soul, and Rabbi Yochanan died. So you can see that in this source also, right? So we have another source here where we have a situation where someone is so upset to have lost the companionship. First, it's Reish Lakish who's upset to have lost the companionship of Rabbi Yochanan, and then Rabbi Yochanan, where we don't actually see a lot of remorse for him, by the way. It's conspicuously absent whether he actually feels guilty. So that's, I think, for me, interesting, but that's okay. He, at the very least, has certainly gotten very upset over the idea that he's lost his bar plukta. That means he's lost his study partner. He's lost his chavruta, and he can't function. And he's crying out in the streets. And that's before he says his mind was taken. He kept screaming until he went crazy. And he went insane. And the mercy, again, the same as we saw before, in the case of Chonia Malgal, he was able to have presence of mind to pray for his own mercy to be taken. And in this instance, it's actually the colleagues of Rabbi Yochanan who wanted to help him, who wanted to give him companionship, but weren't able to actually give him the companionship that he so sought. And so they pray for mercy, and then he dies. Okay, so let's go back to the next source. All right, so here's our source from Babylonian Talmud Ta'anit 7a. Rabbi Chama, the son of Rabbi Hanina, said, "What is the meaning of that which is written? Iron sharpens iron. So a man sharpens the countenance of his friend." What does it mean when Mishle says, iron sharpens iron, and so we have to learn that humans sharpen each other, like a person can sharpen his fellow person. So they explain, just as with iron implements, one sharpens the other, right? Think when you use a steel, right? Or an iron, and you want to sharpen a knife, they sharpen each other. So too, when Torah scholars study together, they sharpen one another in halakha. So for those of you who are familiar with this, you may imagine, right? It's not actually a pleasant sound, and I know my sister is here. She can attest to the idea that I remember very well my mother sharpening our knives in the kitchen. That's like a thing. In my head, I remember very well. It's not a pleasant sound, by the way. So, metal against metal, but I guess it works. And it sharpens each other. And so too, Torah scholars, sometimes it's not a pleasant sound, and sometimes there's argument, and sometimes you butt heads, and sometimes you yell at each other, and sometimes you're screaming even, but you'll come out sharper. You want to be sharp in order to be a Torah scholar. So that's what they're saying, right? So then it goes on. Rabbi Bar Chana said, here's another one. Here's another analogy. Why are matters of Torah compared to fire? As it is stated, is not my word like fire, says God. This is from Jeremiah. This comes to tell you that just as fire does not ignite in a lone stick of wood, but rather in a pile of kindling. So in other words, when you want to start a fire, you don't just put one, piece of like a stick down and hope to get it. You actually need a lot of kindling in order to start the fire. So too, matters of Torah are not understood alone. Meaning you actually need a fellow scholar, a fellow study buddy. You need a chavruta in order to understand Torah properly. Okay, so the last, I think, section we're going to do here. This is super famous in Pirkei Avot, so the ethics of the fathers. You may have recognized this. We have a text that says that Yoshuv and Prachia received whatever. They received the oral tradition from those before them. Yoshuv and Prachia said, appoint for yourself a teacher and acquire for yourself a companion. And judge all people with the scale weighted in their favor. So, but there's lots of wisdom here. We're not going to spend a lot of time on all of it, but the idea is that he personally, Yoshuv and Prachia, there's a lot of cute pithy statements throughout Pirkei Avot. This particular statement is saying you should find yourself a teacher, but in addition, a teacher is really not enough. You actually have to acquire for yourself a person on your level, a peer, a companion with which to learn Torah. And then in addition, you should also be favorable. Don't judge people negatively automatic. There is a text in Avot Rabbi Natan, which is a midrash actually on Pirkei Avot. It's very unusual to have a midrash that's a midrash on a rabbinic set of texts. Usually midrashim are specifically commentary on biblical texts, but Avot Rabbi Natan is now commenting on the rabbinic Pirkei Avot. And he says, okay, what's meant? What do we mean by acquire for yourself a friend? How? It teaches, one should acquire a friend to eat with, to drink with, to read with, to study with, and sleep with, revealing to them all one's secrets, those of Torah and those of worldly affairs. And when you sit and learn Torah together, if one of you makes a mistake, for example, in halakha or in properly ordering the material, they mean Jewish text. Remember, this is an oral society. So in other words, you remember the order of the material incorrectly. Or if he calls the impure thing pure, or if he calls the pure thing impure, or he says the thing that should be not permitted, is permitted or the thing that is permitted is not permitted, then your friend, this fellow person, that's their job. They're there for you. They've got your back. They can correct you. And from what biblical source? Because they always want to know, is there a biblical basis for what we're saying? Because that's super important, right? We have to always ground ourselves in biblical text. From what scriptural source do we know that a friend correcting another is going to bring good reward to their labor, to their endeavors? As it was said, this sounds familiar, two are better than one, as they have good reward in their endeavors. So we end back at two are better than one. We started with two are better than one over there, which was Ibn Ezra commenting on Lo tov heyot adam lavado, it's not good for a man to be alone. And now we're back at Kohelet and Ecclesiastes, where it talks about two are better than one. What does it mean? It's always better to have a fellow person with you, because then you're going to do better, right? It's good to have a partner. For those of you who ever watch Shark Tank, they always want to have more than one shark. Okay, so just to sum up, what are some of the things that we gathered from these particular texts? One, two are better than one. When they say two are better than one, you might have thought that that was talking about a romantic relationship, but it seems like they're going to go in a different direction. We then see Yochanan and Rabbi Chia, who teach us about the power of fellowship, and also Rabbi Hanina, where fellowship, in this instance, like a person coming maybe to visit a person, possibly that might be something about Bikur Cholim, about visiting the sick. Possibly it's also just that they have that study relationship, that fellow person, it's almost like they're freed from prison, which is really a beautiful concept, that the idea of companionship is like freeing a person from prison. Ania Me'agel, who then, sorry about that, hold on. Chonia Me'agel, who then reminds us perhaps to appreciate the fellowship we have, as he did not in his own time, but now we can learn from his lessons that he took 70 years of very good napping to learn. Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, which is a heartbreaking, really, story of love and companionship gone wrong. There's a lot of, I think, really interesting things to sort of delve into in their relationship. But either way, even if it was imperfect while it was there, when they lose this relationship, not only does it result in the death of Reish Lakish, because he's just sad that his friend has disrespected him in this way, but Rabbi Yochanan is just absolutely distraught and wrecked, really. And it results in insanity, and therefore it ends up that they need to request mercy on him and request, release from living. And then the last bits, which talk about students of Torah, need to sharpen each other. We need to sharpen our learning and make us better people. And the last one that really talks about how the ideal for what all of us need is someone special, someone that we can tell our secrets to, someone that we can study with, someone to give that, sort of back and forth with. And that is where we're going to end. And then invite some questions, yes?
Okay, very good. Iscah, that was great. Thank you so much for, my God, so many texts to consider here. You really put it together. One of the things that occurred to me, and then we'll open this up for some questions. I know intuitively how important community is in our lives as Jews. And we so much appreciate that from our own congregation. But the question I want to begin with is this. Part of the dilemma I think we're feeling today is, how do we achieve community or fellowship, as you were putting it, when we're isolated? And I didn't see so much in your presentation. It was, your subtitle was, how do we, what is your subtitle here? How rabbis cope with isolation and loneliness, as if community and isolation are in tension or even in conflict. Is that, from your understanding of all the sources you've been studying, is that true, or is there something about achieving community even when isolated?
So I mean, I'm interested in other people's perspectives on this also. But I've been thinking about, I think one thing that's running through as a theme of all these texts is the appreciation of community. And that's what I think is really what I'm getting from all of these texts, right? So in the case of, well, just about everybody really, but like especially Choni Malgel and Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, I think what's really important to remember is that they didn't know how good they had it, right? When they had it. And if there's anything that we can gain from this is it possible that we can really learn to appreciate and acknowledge and maybe tell the people who are closest to us, even the ones with whom we butt heads, right? And we can tell them how much they mean to us and how crucial they are for the betterment of humanity and for our own sake. So that was what I saw running throughout most of these texts. But I'm interested in hearing what other people are thinking.